What is up, everyone, and welcome back to another Skywatch update. It has been quite a while since the last update, but we are back with some extremely interesting new content, some of which may give some hints into what kind of beings destroyed the world itself within the Lost Skies game lore, and some very high-tech new enemies that puts a very large question mark onto the Gaul civilization, who we've talked a bit about in the past. And with this, I do want to say the newest additions in this content update, in my opinion, are some of the coolest things we've actually gotten to see shared publicly so far, so I cannot express in words how excited I am to share this. Nonetheless, I don't want to waste your time, so let's go ahead and get straight into this update. Now, like usual, these updates generally start off with some interesting preliminary content / information, but then gradually moves into more and more interesting stuff, as I mentioned before. But to start off, the devs do give us a small announcement saying that while the team's official update posts have slowed down, make no mistake, the development on Lost Skies is advancing at a rapid pace. The game is truly starting to take shape, and while it's still important to stress the team is very much in a pre-alpha stage, they think that a lot of people will be very surprised by just how much progress is being made if they could actually see the game being played today. But as of now, they are not quite ready to show it off in its entirety yet, and it truly is, as they say, you only get one chance to make a good first impression. To start off, the team has a bunch of new UX updates, which has been comprised by the team's UX designer Ellen, who has been hard at work creating a range of elements during the sprint, which simply is a term that describes the leg or piece of development area. Several sprints will make up a milestone in this case, which is a larger build update that the devs will give to their partners at Humble Games, as well as the open development community. And one of the big features that Ellen has been working on is a game compendium. This essentially is a large collection of knowledge that will automatically fill out as you explore the game world. And in the video they provide here, they even have a variety of categories including the world, creatures, items, tutorials, and even achievements. And at the end, you also get to see a small microsecond view of the tutorial island looking absolutely stunning. Now, they do state here that mostly all of the descriptive text within the different item names are used as temporary placeholder text. This obviously isn't the final product, but seeing the new additions of these icons and categories really helps kind of shape up the look and feel of the new menus. And one of the very interesting things I think you may want to keep in mind here is a small icon that briefly appears for a second in the creatures tab of this video, where we see an icon of what looks like either some kind of monster looking being or maybe some kind of ship-like thing, entity, whatever that is, with the subtext that says, quote, "Forces of the Seraphs," which is a very vague and unclear statement as to what that actually is. And while this may not seem too important at first, as we progress to this update, I want you to keep this in mind. Just focus on this little icon, as it may have some very interesting implications of what the ancient beings we'll be facing in the worlds of Lost Skies might actually be, which, as we know from the Lost Skies homepage, states that one of the key features in this game will be engaging in epic naval-style boss fights against the ones responsible for the ends of humanity. And even in addition to this, we get some cool close-ups of the icons that Ellen has been making in the sprint, where we get a large variety of propeller icons, some material, meats, foods, and among others, a very cool book icon that represents the compendium, which utilizes all of these different icons in this edition. Second to this, we also get to see some awesome compass icons, which includes pins, ship, remote player, ping, and even death loot icons as well, which all will be useful for a number of different tracking things within the game in terms of just navigation as a whole. Now, as of this point, the devs haven't exactly made clear on what kind of map style that is actually guaranteed to be implemented. However, I do think it's somewhat safe to say that based on these, making pings in the game, having a variety of map icons, means that in some way the map will actually be put in. Whether that function works by method of, say, a placeable item map or is something that the player will craft and keep on their person is still very much unclear. But at the very least, this does give you somewhat a good idea of the potential functions that may be included. Now, before we move on to the sky travel portion of this update, we do have a few more additions related to icon stuff, that which includes some trophy head icons of the deer we have seen made in previous updates, an icon for the ship railguard assets, an icon for the baby Nautilus trapped in a little jar who we've seen in previous Skywatch posts as well, a loading icon, and even an updated Gall disc icon, which, if you remember, we covered all the way back in Skywatch 10 where it was initially conceptualized, and in the recent press release we got to see the in-game photos showing off its very cool futuristic design. And in addition to this, we also get an important widespread edition of colorblind mockups, which is demonstrated by the arrow icons in this image, of which I think it kind of goes to show how much the game devs have put in store in terms of just playability. But more specifically, I'm kind of referring to the additional inclusive aspects of the game that we've seen, where in previous Skywatch posts there have been indications for fully implemented controller support and, among other things, the practical testing of inclusion of reformatted game menu design for many different languages. And with this additional focus of colorblind options as well, I think they're all fantastic additions to have put in, especially this early in the process of the game's creation. It's very neat to see so many different aspects of the game have a focus on allowing anyone of almost any background to enjoy the game nearly to its fullest extent. And the last of the UX content the devs shared is a discovered item pop-up, where in the image they provide an example using the berry as a placeholder, where if you collect or find a newly discovered item, you'll be notified and possibly have the option for extended details of that given item as well. So to Ellen, just want to say you've done a fantastic job putting all these new additions together. But we must go on. The next set of development, as mentioned before, is the Sky Travel category. Now, if you guys remember in the last Skywatch, they covered some preliminary work on damaged decals for ship parts, where in the first video here, they provide an example from Andy adding consecutive damage to a rusted cannon. While the videos unfortunately don't have any sound included, they show off the damage VFX in real time as it's being applied, where the cannon slowly degrades in visual quality as it becomes more destroyed. And at a certain point, he begins to apply repair functions to the cannon, which slowly builds it back up. In addition, they mention a woman named Claudia who spent some time importing old VFX from Worlds Adrift to then be updated within Lost Skies. The purpose of this was to help give a starting benchmark and frame of reference when generating the new Lost Skies VFX, so that they wouldn't have to completely start from scratch when beginning the design format itself. And even in this video, they show a wide range of ship propeller and engine VFX under a lot of stress and damage, where you can visually see a lot of smoke, and for others you can have a distinct indication of fire or flaming engine VFX as well, which all look very good. The newer animation they also have here is VFX for the cave creature, which we have seen in past updates, and from what we know so far in regards to the creature's development, we've seen some early charging animations for when the entity comes at the player, some with jumping charge attacks, and even a underground burrowing move where they dig underground and then pop out below the player as a means of getting close to you, which I'm more than positive this clouded dirt is likely supposed to be made just for that type of attack pattern. Another cool animation is this kind of high-tech electrical cloud animation that appears in the player with another ship part. And as much as I'd like to share what it is, sadly I don't think that's within my power to share. So unfortunately, you the viewer will have to guess what this is going to be used for. But what I can say is that this device is something that has shown up in a previous post, so do keep that in mind for reference if you do get curious. And to finish off the explosive side of things, we have one last video which has a sole focus on just that, which a large array of different fiery explosions and particle effects is being shown off in a testing area. Lastly, for the sky travel genre of the post, they do give us a small clip of the current Gall disc crafting animation, where they use a cannon in this case, which similarly to a previous post demonstrates that beautiful Gall circular lining pattern that we've seen, which almost gives the appearance of a holographic cracked glass, where in addition they also show off a player on a placeholder of a ship and show how the player is able to fully rotate and orient the item as he chooses. And in addition, you can see how the different animations for the Gall disc itself holographically change on the player's hand as he performs different actions of selecting where to place an object and when the object is being placed. Next, we're going to move on to the island content. So far, a ton of work has been done to make the islands as fun to explore as possible. First off, Luke has been hard at work adding a grappling hook tutorial area to the starter island. The grappling hook is one of the main features of Lost Skies, but due to the physical nature of the grappling hook in the game, the devs are well aware it can take a good amount of time to become proficient in using the tool, which could otherwise lead to frustration for new players who have yet to, quote, get good, and yes, that is their own quote. And for this reason, they want to be able to introduce players to the grappling hook in a controlled way. The idea behind this is that the grappling hook tutorial area, you will initially be given a learner's grappling hook, which would be functionally limited and introduces you to the mechanics in a step-by-step format in an as risk-free way as humanly possible. And the screenshots they provide here show how the area has been shaping up so far, and among these photos I've been showing you, we get to see a bunch of detailed cracked rock structures that have been since lost to time, and among other areas, open gaping areas likely to test the different grappling hook functions, which has a very cool foggy silhouette and some cool stalagmite rocks formations that are hanging from the ceiling as well. And even in the corner of one of these, we can see what looks almost exactly like the Worlds Adrift databank that appears turned off, or at the very least has been severely damaged and lost to time, which I think is a beautiful homage to Worlds Adrift. Whether you might possibly make a connection to Worlds Adrift lore, that would lead me to believe that if we place some kind of time frame on the period of Lost Skies itself, I would think that it means this period would be long after the times of Worlds Adrift, which, of course, all of that is simply just speculation, and since Lost Skies isn't meant to be a Worlds Adrift 2, I think it's more of an homage, so to speak, to Worlds Adrift rather than a guaranteed lore implication, but nonetheless, I think it's very cool. But real quick, going back to the very first image here, one of the most prominent things that really caught my eye, which references what I told you guys to keep in mind before, was this ancient cave art. And with this, we can see a ton of highly detailed glowing designs, with one showing icons of pickaxes being held together and a glowing rock next to it. Likely, I think this is meant to represent the Atlas ore, which, as we know now, was a great resource likely either discovered by the Gaul or even Saborians, which has flotation effects, and is in fact the same power that is being harnessed for the creation of floating ships themselves. Now, the most interesting thing here of note is what's right below it. A depiction on the left of what looks like a ship of some kind, or possibly even the crashed Gaul lifeboat, maybe? The devs have talked about this before, and there's also a symbol of two swords clashing together, and a similar looking symbol to the one we had before that had the title Forces of the Seraphs. Now, it's possible this is referring to what may have actually destroyed the Gaul people, or even Saber themselves, and may have some kind of connection in terms of a lore aspect. Or it could be something else entirely. But seeing these cool depictions, I think, especially to those of you who are very lore driven with regards to the Lost Skies story, these are very important markers as to what the end directive of the game's lore could be. But nonetheless, similar to a longtime favorite creator of mine, every and all things in these updates is in fact subject to change. So it's not as if all these things are set in stone, so to speak, but do with that information as you will. In other island-related work, the team's artists have been revisiting the Saborian aesthetic, as it has become apparent to them that some of the Saborian tech in-game has gotten away from the original Saborian brief. The images below show some of the planned changes or updates that they want to make to different items, where among other things they wanted to adjust the look of some Saborian weaponry they've added, the look of certain chests, the repair tool we have seen before, and even the data drone we've had shared a while back as well. And as I understand, the original focus for Saber was that they used very hard-line geometric shapes and sharp edges in their designs, and less sleek designs, less circular elements, which is vastly more akin to that of the Gaul people and even the Gaul language itself, which we have seen before in previous updates. So, in light of this, the team is making a variety of minor adjustments and alterations to the Saborian equipment to better reflect this focus, where they show a few examples of adjustments to the Saborian relay puzzle and what looks like a defensive cannon asset as well, where the adjustment's overall look has a green color change and more of a white kind of futuristic granite/metallic look, all of which look very cool. And to go into a little more detail of what the team actually did to achieve these changes, they share a close-up photo explaining that going through and updating each existing asset with new textures and shaders would be extremely time-consuming. So a person on the team named Claudia came up with the bespoke material generator as shown in the screenshot. This allows the team to essentially replace textures much more quickly across a wider range of different assets, which I think is a very smart way to go about making these changes, as it opens up the possibilities for making more changes later on if new additions or new areas in certain biomes call for different machine aesthetics, if similar puzzle tech or devices happen to be used. Next, we do have a look at the work that's been done for the physics-based puzzles, where again the team's esteemed artist Jonathan Betts has been concepting these. Here there are two variations, the sphere and the cube, where you will use a combination of grappling hook and Atlas lifters. FYI, they are spoilers apparently, but they covered this more in a bit, which are used to manipulate physics-based objects into their specified sockets in order to complete that given puzzle. They mentioned that in the art, the Atlas shard crystal is the center of the object. It will point to the correct socket, similar to how the Marauder's compass would direct you in Worlds Adrift, which will be useful in the case where you have more than one object to move and you need to know which way the balls need to go into which holes. Don't mind the terminology there. Anyway, the final island update today has a focus on something quite new in terms of enemy type, that being the enemy drones, where Jonathan Betts again has been concepting many of these different enemy drone types, including but not limited to AoE drones and the Healbot drone, which repairs its fellow drones when damaged in a fight. All of which are looking super cool and high tech, and even in addition, the team has actually furthered these additions quite a bit, where one of their 3D artists, John Warner, has been taking these concepts and coming up with 3D models based off of them. However, they do mention that all of these models are still very much work in progress, so everything from textures, models, VFX may change between now and release. Now, they even go on to provide a very small GIF which shows a bunch of drones in action, where the AoE or possibly attack drones are focusing their charge attacks on the player, while adjusting for their given positions, and the Healbot drone is generating an almost electrical green cloud VFX type smoke for the healing of the damaged enemy drones. They also do mention that so far, the AI of the heal drone itself is able to follow a logical method of healing order, where it knows essentially which of the nearby drones are in critical need of repair based on their remaining health, and then accordingly targets healing based on that understanding of which has the highest priority of necessary healing requirements. Additional things to note are that groups of drones are now fully aware of their buddies within a group, and that the team has run their first pass of drone AI formations where the drone is fully capable of putting itself in specific positions within a group, which allows for more strategic attacks on the player. And even though they may lack distinct firepower individually, I believe this will allow the player more opportunity to have to think out and plan how they want to handle a drone swarm they may encounter. As from what the team has put together so far with these new additions, definitely seems to give a good impression on the combat for the game, as it adds more degrees of consideration in a fight than just point and shoot. Now, I do want to say personally, I think the new enemy is both a great asset visually, but in that same light, it made me question some things I think could be a major turning point in the game's lore development. If you look back at some of the photos of the drones themselves, you may start to notice something. Symbols on the drones, and more specifically, Gaul symbols. Now, I think this is a vitally important detail from what we know so far. The Gaul lifeboats were made as a means of trying to save what little was left from humanity. We also know from previous Skywatches that much of the design art of even the Saborian tech was based off of Gaul tech. This was made quite clear all the way back in Skywatch 16, where we covered the possible plans for the Resource Thumper device, which in the artistic notations the devs shared, they directly say that the Saborian tech was clasping the Gaul tech. And in this same focus, the Saborian shipyard, strangely enough, has Gaul symbols on the holographic shipyard bubble. Now, before, these additions gave much rise to concern over what the relationships between the Gaul people and the Saborians were, as we could relatively guesstimate and reason before that the Saborians considered themselves within their own society to be seen as gods, and in another sense, above other societies in every aspect. Even if their own technological advancements were less than that of others, as we discussed in that video, it's possible that those induced cultural expectations are what set them back in terms of technological advancement, which would explain why much of their own named technological devices would be using Gaul tech as the base, suggesting that if they couldn't make their own tech, then they might have just torn apart and scrapped the highly advanced Gaul tech and used it for their own means. Now, what was so puzzling before was how the Gauls seemed to have so much more advanced tech than the Saborians, and yet we haven't seen much at all explained about them as a whole. It's not even clear if the Gaul were truly human at all, but at the very least it seemed that as a society, they had a positive focus on preservation based on the lifeboats, which again were made to preserve the remnants of civilization. And this was true in spite of how far ahead they were on the tech front. But now seeing this addition of an enemy drone, something whose purpose is directly to attack the player or possibly other living things, we don't really know for sure, this completely broke the understanding that we had before. Why in the world would there be Gaul symbols on the enemy drones? Is it possible that whomever made these, similar to the Saborians, took apart and scrapped tech from the Gaul to make these enemies? Is it possible the Gaul were truly responsible for making these enemies? And if so, why would they do this while simultaneously being the ones responsible for trying to save the remnants of civilization? Regardless, this new addition plasters a giant hole in the previous potential understanding of what actually might have happened with the Gaul society. And it only gives me even more questions about what truly is going on. So I will leave all of that to you guys in the comments. Lastly, we're going to move on to the final section of today's Skywatch, which focuses directly on utility items. The first of which is an updated / retextured furnace, as well as a snapshot of how it actually looks in the game when fueled. And it has a very large and distinct design, with accompanying VFX for the furnace cooking materials and particle effects for the embers and smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe itself. And finally, the team is thrilled to share their progress on their Atlas lifters, which was partially mentioned before in this post. First of which are some initial concepts for the Atlas lifters by Jonathan Betts with their work in progress model, where the far right design was eventually the one the team decided to take forward for the game modeling. The future plans are that the Atlas crystal will eventually be emissive and glowing when charged, and as it begins to deplete and run out of power, will deactivate on the given object. They also mentioned that for those that played Worlds Adrift, seeing the Atlas lifter return will be welcoming news, and for the newer players who didn't get to experience Worlds Adrift, they do give a short brief about its functionality. Essentially, the Atlas lifter utilizes Atlas, which is a compound in the game that gives objects floating properties and allows ships to fly. This helps you move otherwise immovable objects and will be a placeable thing that works by applying lift and negating some of an object's mass. This will then allow you to manipulate a physical object within the world, which is demonstrated with these small GIF videos, where among other things, these small clips show how lift is applied to that object in 3D space, where heavier objects will require more lifters to generate enough lift to be able to manipulate them fully. So in another clip here, it shows how the lifters can be applied even to things like cut off parts of trees and logs, and how each tiny individual point on a given log or item, depending on where and how you place the lifter, will adjust the lifting force and orientation of that object. Where they have an example here where the lifters are even applied to a log, and the player is able to cut that log in half, and since the weight of that separated object has now decreased, this added more lift to the sectional piece, which goes to show how in-depth the physics engine and additions go in terms of just integrating the Atlas lifters into the game. They also show how damaged lifters, by shooting them, will essentially result in the object they were attached to falling back toward the ground. And they also give a GIF that shows how the lifters begin to lose their charge after a given period of time, automatically detaching from the object, which they mentioned the VFX for is not at all final, but that this shows the potential use for the in-game applications. And one kind of fun thing I think they point out here is that lifters can be even applied to items that you drop on the ground, where they use resource mine counterparts on the wood itself, explaining how the object being lighter will more easily lift. But in my head, I'm kind of thinking this opens quite a big gateway for fun shenanigans with friends, because I'm imagining myself with my friends taking an item or weapon of theirs and just slapping an Atlas lifter on it and then pushing their floating item over the abyss and just being able to do all manners of mischief with this. It just seems like it'd be a really fun time to mess around with, but we must go on. The last thing to cover in today's Skywatch is our Island Creator Showcase. This month, the team is sharing another one of Ugly's amazing islands called the Grand Inventor's Mansion by none other than Ugly himself. The team is always impressed with Ugly's work, and today's island is one that made the most seemingly mundane ideas come to life, with a distinct and overtly detailed take on a mansion that is packed full of stunning, handmade visuals and tons of interesting secrets. The dev team cannot wait to see what players will make of this detailed island should they come across it in the game. And even I myself have to say, Ugly, exploring your island was truly a wonder. The level of intricate detail and combinations of different assets you put together is truly mind-boggling. Like, you definitely are an amazing creator, so it is so cool to see your island get showcased by the devs once again. So congrats, my friend, you did a great job. But before we close out here, it's important to once again mention that almost everything in terms of these updates is very much subject to change at almost any point. So to the things we have covered, none of them will represent the final product, and nor are they guaranteed to be. But even despite that, the Skywatch here has just been so intricately detailed and jam-packed full of awesome new additions. And like always, if you guys would like to sign up and possibly be selected for the open development community, get early access to current builds, and get updates for the game even more in depth than these, and even possibly have your own islands showcased in these Skywatches, I will have the links to their Discord and everything else posted in the description. So remember to stay healthy, stay well, and like always, have a beautiful rest of your day, boys. Peace.